The mahogany-paneled conference room smelled faintly of leather and dust, a place where legacies were sealed and families often fractured. Eleanor Hayes, age 61, sat stiffly in her chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her silver-streaked hair, once carefully styled, now framed a face lined with decades of sacrifice. For 42 years she had stood beside her husband Thomas, supporting his ambitions, raising their 2 sons, and managing the home so he could build what eventually became a $30 million empire. She had believed that their shared struggle, their partnership, would be honored in the final chapter of his life. But as the lawyer read aloud the will, Eleanor's heart began to sink. Line after line allocated the public estate, luxury properties, investments, company shares, directly to her sons, Daniel and Marcus. They barely concealed their eagerness, exchanging glances as if victory had already been secured. Serena, Daniel's wife, sat beside them, her lips curled in a faint smile of triumph. When at last Eleanor's name was mentioned, the attorney paused only briefly before sliding a thin, worn envelope across the table toward her. No explanation, no ceremony, just a casual gesture, as if she were being handed scraps from a feast. The sting of humiliation tightened in her chest. She touched the envelope, its paper brittle with age, and felt every eye in the room on her. Marcus chuckled under his breath, and Serena leaned forward with her trademark sharpness. "Well, I suppose that's something to keep you busy," she quipped. "Perfect for cutting out recipes or sewing patterns, don't you think?" The words dripped with condescension, each syllable meant to belittle. Daniel didn't even defend his mother. Instead, he smirked, sliding his share of documents neatly into a leather folder. The lawyer, bound to neutrality, continued on, his voice flat and indifferent. Eleanor barely heard him. Her vision blurred as she clutched the envelope in trembling fingers. Was this really all Thomas had left for her? After years of loyalty, after countless nights waiting for him to come home from business trips, after sacrificing her own dreams so his could flourish. Was this brittle envelope the sum of her worth? Around her, the atmosphere was thick with entitlement. Daniel boasted of future plans for the company. Marcus spoke about expanding investments. Serena whispered suggestions about selling off one of the family estates for quick cash. Not one of them looked at Eleanor with gratitude or even acknowledgement. In that moment, a wave of betrayal coursed through her. Yet beneath the shame, something else stirred, something quiet, almost imperceptible. She slipped the envelope into her handbag without a word, lifting her chin just slightly. If Thomas had truly left her nothing, then she would endure the humiliation. But if the envelope carried more than it seemed, she would discover it in her own time, away from the smirks and the cruelty. The will reading concluded, and the room emptied quickly, her children eager to celebrate their windfall. Eleanor remained seated a moment longer, her dignity intact despite the storm within. The envelope rested against her side, small and fragile, but heavy with unspoken promise. The Hayes estate, once lively with dinner parties and family laughter, now felt like a cavern of ghosts. Eleanor walked slowly through its marble halls, the sound of her heels echoing in the silence. She clutched the worn envelope to her chest as though it were the last remnant of her husband's touch. For hours after the will reading, she had sat in the car, unable to summon the courage to open it. Now, in the solitude of her study, she finally found the strength. She sat at Thomas's old oak desk, the same desk where he had spent countless late nights poring over contracts. Her hands trembled as she slit the envelope open with a silver letter opener. Out slid a single folded document, an account slip embossed with the insignia of the International Bank of Switzerland. Eleanor's breath caught. She unfolded it carefully, her eyes scanning the numbers, the codes, the unfamiliar notations. It was unmistakably a bank account, one she had never known existed. Her pulse quickened. She reached for the landline phone, the one Thomas had insisted on keeping despite the modern upgrades their sons had pushed for. Dialing the international number scrawled in the corner of the document, she expected nothing more than confusion, perhaps even a mistake. But then came the calm, Swiss-accented voice of a banker. "Yes, Mrs. Hayes, your account has been verified." Eleanor straightened in her chair, her heart hammering. "The balance?" she asked softly, scarcely able to form the words. A pause. Then, $100 million US. The world seemed to tilt. Eleanor gripped the phone so tightly her knuckles whitened. 100 million. It was not only real. It was more than 3 times the inheritance her sons had gloated over just hours earlier. She closed her eyes, letting the number echo in her mind. Relief, disbelief, and a sting of sorrow all collided in her chest. The banker continued politely. "There are also arrangements concerning a safe deposit box in your name. The code is a date of personal significance." When Eleanor visited the local Swiss affiliate branch days later, she stood before the heavy steel door of the vault. The security officer gestured toward a keypad. She hesitated only briefly before typing in the numbers of her wedding. Date, June 14th, 1979. The lock clicked open. Inside the box rested 2 items, a thick bundle of files and a sealed envelope in Thomas's handwriting. Her breath caught again at the sight of his script, the bold, steady strokes that had once signed every check, every love letter. She opened the letter first. The words on the page would alter her understanding of her husband, her sons, and her entire life. The files that accompanied it were chilling: financial records, surveillance photographs, transcripts of conversations. Each piece pointed to the same horrifying truth. Her sons had not only betrayed their father, but were plotting to betray her as well. Eleanor pressed her hand to her lips, steadying herself against the vault's cold walls. The shabby envelope once mocked by Serena was no trinket. It was a key, one Thomas had left only for her, a key to the truth, to hidden power, and to a reckoning yet to come. Eleanor unfolded the letter with trembling hands, the faint scent of her husband's cologne still lingering in the paper. Thomas's handwriting, firm yet weary, stretched across the page. His words were not of comfort, but of revelation. A final confession from a man who had carried secrets too heavy to share while alive. "My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and what remains between us is the truth I could not tell you face to face. I loved our sons, but I could no longer trust them. They have chosen a path of greed and destruction, and I could not allow them to destroy you as well." Her eyes blurred with tears as she continued, forcing herself to absorb every painful detail. Daniel, her firstborn, the one who had always carried himself with such confidence, was not the responsible businessman he pretended to be. According to the files Thomas had left, Daniel had siphoned millions from company accounts over the years, covering gambling debts at private clubs and casinos. The numbers were stark: wire transfers, falsified ledgers, offshore accounts. Thomas had confronted him once, only to be met with denial and fury. Marcus, the younger, had fallen even deeper. He had started with recreational drugs in college, but now Thomas's investigators discovered he owed hundreds of thousands to loan sharks, men who would not hesitate to collect payment with blood if money was not forthcoming. There were photographs in the file. Marcus exchanging envelopes in parking lots, speaking nervously with men whose faces were blurred with malice. But the most devastating blow came in the form of a small black USB drive clipped to the letter. Eleanor slipped it into her late husband's laptop, and the audio began to play. The voices were unmistakable: Daniel, Marcus, and Serena. Daniel's voice: "She's too old to manage any of this. If we get a doctor to sign off that she's unfit, we can move her into Cedar Grove. The board will side with us, and we'll have everything tied up." Serena's laugh: "She won't even know what's happening. That old envelope she clings to probably has nothing inside. We'll take care of her. On paper, at least." Marcus, quieter but desperate: "We have to move fast. If she realizes what Dad actually left her, we're finished." Eleanor froze, every muscle in her body tense as the recording continued. They had spoken of her not as a mother, not as a human being, but as an obstacle. A problem to be handled, removed, locked away. Her hands clenched into fists, crushing the edge of Thomas's letter. Rage mingled with grief, but Thomas's final words steadied her. "I could not protect you in life, but I can shield you in death. The public will I left behind was a decoy, a cage for their ambition. The true fortune, Over $200 million is in accounts only you can access. Use it wisely. Use it to protect yourself. And if you must, use it to remind our children that a mother's strength is not so easily erased. Eleanor set the letter down, her chest heaving. The room around her felt colder, heavier. The truth was unbearable, but it was also empowering. Her sons had underestimated her, and Thomas had given her the tools to fight back. What had begun as humiliation at the will reading was now something else entirely, a declaration of war. For days, Eleanor prepared in silence. She moved through the empty halls of her home with deliberate calm, though every step was fueled by the storm in her chest. The betrayal of her children still burned, but she refused to let grief make her weak. With precision, she transferred $10 million into a domestic account, money she could use without raising suspicion. She hired a discreet but formidable security team who stationed themselves just outside the property, blending into the background. And most importantly, she secured the counsel of Arthur Vance, a seasoned independent lawyer known for exposing fraud. The house was ready, so was she. On a gray afternoon, the trap was sprung. A black sedan pulled into the driveway, its tires crunching against the gravel. Eleanor, watching from her upstairs window, saw Daniel step out first, his expression carefully rehearsed into concern. Serena followed, her eyes gleaming with cold calculation. Last came a tall, wiry man in a dark suit, carrying a medical bag. Dr. Nelson, the supposed geriatric specialist. Eleanor descended the stairs slowly, her recording device tucked discreetly inside her cardigan pocket. The living room had been staged for this meeting, chairs neatly arranged, tea set untouched, the atmosphere deceptively domestic. "Mother," Daniel began, his tone dripping with false warmth. "We've brought someone here to help. Just a routine evaluation. Nothing to worry about." Dr. Nelson offered a thin smile, already pulling out forms. "Mrs. Hayes, I'm here to assess your mental capacity. Just a few questions and we'll have everything sorted." Serena placed a stack of pre-filled papers on the table, her manicured finger tapping where Eleanor's signature was meant to go. "It's all for your well-being. Cedar Grove Senior Living is one of the best facilities in the state. You'll be cared for, pampered even." Eleanor sat quietly, folding her hands in her lap. "Cedar Grove," she repeated softly, as though tasting the words. Her gaze lifted, sharp and unwavering. "Interesting that you already had the contract prepared. Signed before Thomas even passed, wasn't it?" The room froze. Daniel's jaw tightened. Serena's smile faltered. Dr. Nelson shifted uncomfortably, his pen stilled in his hand. Eleanor leaned forward, her voice calm but edged with steel. "Do you think I don't know? Do you think I haven't seen the contract? Heard the recordings?" She glanced deliberately at the pocket of her cardigan, letting them wonder. Daniel's mask cracked. "Mother, you're confused. This is for your own good. Confused?" Eleanor's voice rose just slightly, resonant with fury suppressed too long. "I am more clear-headed now than I have ever been. You would cage me in a nursing home, strip me of my dignity, and sign away everything your father built." Serena tried to interject, her tone sharper now. "We're protecting you from yourself. You can't manage these responsibilities." Eleanor cut her off with a single word. "Enough." The silence that followed was suffocating. For the first time, it was not Eleanor who looked small in the room, but her children. Unbeknownst to them, every word, every slip of arrogance, was already being recorded. And outside the house, Arthur Vance and 2 plainclothes security officers waited for her signal. The game had shifted. What Daniel, Marcus, and Serena thought would be the day they gained total control would instead become the day their lies began to unravel. The tension in the living room was thick enough to choke on. Daniel's voice had risen. Serena's sharp protest clashed against Eleanor's measured defiance, and Dr. Nelson's pen hovered over the papers, as if the signatures were already his to collect. Then, with a calmness that belied the storm in her chest, Eleanor's fingers brushed against the armrest of her chair, where a discreet button had been hidden. She pressed it once. A faint chime sounded. Within moments, the front door burst open. Arthur Vance strode in, flanked by 2 uniformed officers and a 3rd man in plain clothes. His presence was commanding, his voice clear and resonant. "Dr. Nelson," he said firmly, You are hereby detained under suspicion of practicing medicine without a license and attempted fraud." The so-called doctor stiffened, stammering incoherently as one officer confiscated his bag. Within minutes, his credentials, or lack thereof, were exposed. He had no medical license, no board certification, and a criminal record tucked neatly under an alias. Serena gasped, her composure cracking for the first time. This is outrageous," she snapped, her voice shrill. Arthur's gaze turned to her with the cool detachment of a man who had seen too many liars try to bluff their way out. "What's outrageous, Mrs. Hayes," he said, "is that you and your husband conspired with this impostor to have your own mother-in-law declared incompetent so you could seize control of her estate. All of it is on record." Eleanor reached into her cardigan pocket and held up the small recorder. Its red light blinked, proof that every word of their scheme had been captured. Daniel paled, his bravado draining from his face. "You recorded us," he muttered, as if the betrayal was his mother's rather than his own. Eleanor rose slowly, her voice steady and unyielding. "No, Daniel. You betrayed me, and your father. You plotted to strip me of my freedom, my dignity, my very life." She turned her gaze on Marcus, who had lingered in the shadows of the confrontation, "and you would have let it happen." The silence that followed was pierced only by the shuffling of officers leading Dr. Nelson away in handcuffs. Eleanor inhaled deeply, then spoke with the quiet authority of someone who no longer feared being dismissed. "You have 24 hours, she said, her voice carrying across the room like a judge's sentence. "Return every dollar you stole. Confess every crime, every deception. If you do not, I will release this recording, along with your father's files, to the press and to the prosecutors. And your inheritance, what remains of it, will be stripped from you entirely." Daniel's mouth opened, but no words came. Serena looked at him, desperate for a response, but his silence spoke louder than any defense. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, shame flickering across his face. Arthur Vance stepped forward, handing Eleanor a sealed folder. "Mrs. Hayes now holds controlling rights as majority shareholder," he announced. "This is no longer a matter of family discussion. It is law." Eleanor looked at her children one last time, her eyes cold with both pain and resolve. "This was your chance to stand with me. Instead, you chose to stand against me. Now you will live with the consequences." And with that, she turned away, leaving them in stunned silence. For the first time in decades, Eleanor Hayes was no longer a shadow in her husband's empire. She was its master, and her children knew it. The following day unfolded like a storm sweeping through the company corridors. The boardroom, once a fortress dominated by Daniel and Marcus, was filled with whispers and nervous glances as Eleanor Hayes walked in, Arthur Vance by her side. For the first time, she wasn't merely the widow of Thomas Hayes or the quiet matriarch at the back of the room. She was the rightful leader, carrying with her the weight of both justice and survival. Her first act was decisive. With the evidence of embezzlement, gambling debts, and mismanagement laid bare, Daniel was forced to step down as CEO. His once proud shoulders slumped as the announcement was made. But Eleanor did not simply cut him off. She gave him a path to redemption. He would work under Foreman Gabriel on construction sites, hard labor, sunburnt days, and calloused hands, as repayment for the millions he had siphoned from the company. For the first time, Daniel's wealth and entitlement could not shield him from consequences. Marcus, shaken by the exposure of his drug ties and the looming threat of prison, chose a different path. He signed himself into rehab, under police oversight, determined or at least desperate, to claw his way back to a semblance of dignity. Eleanor did not celebrate his shame, but neither did she shield him. Her love as a mother remained, but it no longer blinded her to justice. When Eleanor took her seat at the head of the boardroom table, a hush settled. The executives, long accustomed to underestimating her, now watched as she signed the papers confirming herself as CEO and majority shareholder. Her presence radiated quiet authority. Her hands, once relegated to homemaking and supporting Thomas's dreams, now commanded the empire she had helped build in silence for 42 years. She wasted no time. Independent audits were launched across every department. Corrupt executives who had cozied up to Daniel and Marcus were dismissed on the spot. She froze questionable accounts, opened the books, and demanded transparency from every manager. Some bristled, many complied. All understood this was no longer a company where backroom deals and hidden ledgers could thrive. Then came the unexpected. Eleanor turned her gaze to the workers. Factory hands, delivery drivers, office clerks, those who had carried the weight of the business while reaping the least, saw their wages raised and benefits expanded. For the first time in years, the company floor buzzed not with resentment, but with hope. But Eleanor's vision stretched beyond the corporation. She announced the creation of the Margaret Rowan Foundation for Dignity and Justice for the Elderly, named after her late mother, who had once been financially manipulated by relatives. The foundation's mission was bold and unflinching: to protect older women from exploitation by their own families, to fund legal support, housing, and counseling for those who had been cast aside or stripped of their autonomy. When Eleanor stood on the stage at the foundation's launch, cameras flashing, her voice carried with a clarity honed by suffering and survival. For decades, I was told my worth was in silence, that my role was to support, not to lead, that my sacrifices were invisible. But today, I stand not for myself alone, but for every woman who has ever been betrayed by those she loved most. Our voices will no longer be silenced. Our dignity will no longer be negotiable, the applause thundered. Not only from the crowd of journalists and dignitaries, but from the very employees who now saw her as more than a figurehead. Eleanor had not merely reclaimed her life, she had redefined it. Her power was no longer borrowed from her husband's legacy, nor dependent on the loyalty of her sons. It was forged by her own courage, sharpened by betrayal, and made unshakable by justice. And as she gazed across the crowd, her chin lifted ever so slightly, Eleanor Hayes knew this truth with absolute certainty. She had not just survived. She had risen.